Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those of you in the UK who are tuning in or going to be tuning in whenever you're watching this. If you're not watching it live, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day or night to watch this video. I'm David Mullings. I'm your host of Island Forward Live. We posted one video last week, was pre-recorded. Do the live video this week, and we'll keep alternating like that. Really enjoyed the first set of videos we did last year, the live ones, the feedback, the interaction from all of you, the Jamaicans.com community. You've been really welcoming, and I appreciate that. The topic I wanted to cover today is what I call the unfinished business of constitutional reform. Right? We're here to talk about Jamaica. We have some key questions. I think this week was a good week to bring up this topic because we just had the Governor General do his throne speech. And there are a lot of us who really do ask a simple question. Do we actually need a Governor General? And that then leads to a number of other questions. I want to spend the next hour getting feedback, getting questions, comments, and just sharing some perspective on it. I don't want to assume that we all understand what constitutional reform means or how hard it might be or how easy, right? Never know. I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I've only read about these things. I live in the United States. I was the first Future Leaders representative on the Jamaica Diaspora Advisory Board for the USA. So I represented Jamaicans under the age of 35 in the entire US and served in that position for almost 3 years. And that was advising the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And connecting with the Prime Minister. I served when Bruce Golding was Prime Minister. It is interesting that he was a Prime Minister that I served under because he wrote a really good article that I'll post. I'll share the link under the video so people can read it as well. That helped to inform some of my thinking. This is called The Unfinished Business of Constitutional Reform, and it was done in the Jamaica Observer on April 22nd, 2018. I didn't realize how much work had been done. I mean, he was pointing out that when it was written 23 years before that. So this is 1995. I mean, this is interesting. But the JLP opposition and the PNP government signed off on a number of constitutional reform measures. And this came after many years of discussion and advocacy, leading to the establishment in 1992 of the Constitutional Commission. So Jamaica actually had a commission, they got submissions, and then they turned around and had a joint select committee in Parliament that was looking at various kinds of reforms that needed to be put in place. Before we dive into what came of that, what were they focused on, what were the results, because unfortunately a lot of us who are Jamaicans that live outside tend to see things in Jamaica as all talk and little action. And then when we do have action, it's extremely slow, it's drip, 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 and we don't have all the things happen. But before we can judge whether or not we should have constitutional reform, we need to talk about what the structure is at this point in time, right? How does it actually work? And then we can start to decide if there are issues that we have with that. I think most of us in the diaspora do have issues with the structure of government and voting, but we shouldn't make that assumption. So, as we know, Jamaica is essentially a parliamentary democracy, right? It's a constitutional monarchy. The head of state is not the Prime Minister. The head of state is the Queen of England, and her representative in Jamaica on the island is the Governor General of Jamaica. So that's the first thing. That is the difference between us and the United States. Right? Canada is similar. You're in the UK. These are the three largest locations of Jamaicans. I'll focus on US, Canada, UK, and then we have Jamaica. So Jamaica is similar to Canada. Governor General, Queen is head of state, that's her representative. The next thing that we tend to have an issue with, especially if we are more in the US system, is that we do not vote directly for the leader of the country. You vote for a party. You vote for your member of parliament. They are in a party. Whoever gets the most seats, right? MPs win the most seats. That party then forms the government. And the leader of that party is usually the person who becomes the prime minister and the leader of the government. Governments are usually split into three branches. So this is the judicial branch, as we know. So we leave the courts alone. We don't deal with that. You have a legislative branch. In the United States, that's the U.S. Congress, right? House of Representatives and the Senate. In a parliament, you have a House of Representatives and a Senate, right? We have the MPs in the lower house, and then you have senators in the upper house. And then the third one is that you have an executive branch. The United States has a system that separates the executive branch from the legislative branch, right? They have a president of the United States who has his cabinet, and they do not sit in Congress. They are not elected representatives in that way. The president is elected. The rest of the group is not elected. And so they separate the three. Most parliamentary democracies do not separate the legislative branch from the executive branch. So we elect MPs in Jamaica, and then those MPs also form the executive. They sit as the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Minister of Education or the Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce. But that is how it is structured generally in parliamentary democracies. I would say that Jamaica is much more Americanized now than that British system that we grew up with. There's no reason that we have to stay with the British system is what I would say. Let me see if I want to make sure I'm not missing any comments from anybody. So nobody, I'm not seeing any comments pop up. Feel free to send a comment or make a comment, but I think that most of us believe that direct elections for the leader of the country would be better for somewhere like Jamaica, something closer to the US system. Most of us may even believe that separating the legislative branch from the executive branch would also be better for the country. We've seen that we've had corruption problems across both parties, across multiple administrations. And maybe if the elected person wasn't the same as the person who was running something, we might get better results as well. Because just because you could get some people in your constituency to vote for you, and we see that happening repeatedly in garrisons where there are seats that are just safe, that does not qualify you to be a Minister of Education or a Minister of Finance or whatever we pick you for. Just because people vote for you doesn't mean you should get that. So I love that Dave Hopwood brings this up. Who elects senators? In Jamaica, senators are not elected. Senators are appointed, right? So you get senators appointed by the Prime Minister, the ruling party, and the senators appointed by the opposition party. A Governor General signs off on them ultimately. Trinidad, which was a constitutional monarchy, right? They went and became a republic. So they removed the Queen as head of state, created a president. The president, again, though, you don't vote for president. You vote for Prime Minister, you vote for MPs. But the president is selected by the House, by Parliament itself. Also, what is the topic, Claudette? The topic is constitutional reform in Jamaica. Do we need constitutional reform? So Jamaica has a appointed Senate. There's an interesting comparison. The U.S. entire Senate is elected. In Jamaica, the entire Senate is appointed. It's selected. In Trinidad, their senators are not elected either, but all of them are not appointed. I believe it's 31 senators. 16 are appointed by the Prime Minister, the ruling party. A smaller number, 8 or so, are appointed by the losing party, the opposition party. And then another 9 or so are actually appointed by the president, who is like our Governor General. The president, who is independent, appoints people from outside of the parties who are notable, for example, within the community. So they have 9 independent senators in Parliament. Jamaica, for the most part, has no independent senators. We've had them in the past. Douglas O'Rain has served as an independent senator decades ago in Jamaica. But we don't vote for senators. You get appointed as a senator in Jamaica. So we have different points that we think we could have some constitutional reform. We should discuss them. I don't want to force my views on anybody. And we do have to think through the mechanism to actually get it done. So before you know what you want to do, though, you need to figure out, is it worth it? Is it actually going to benefit? What is the result that I want to get? I think the result all of us want is a better functioning democracy in Jamaica. We want less garrison voting determining who runs the country. We want direct elections of the person that is in charge of the country. Few people like holding their nose, voting for a candidate for MP that they don't like, they don't think is going to serve them properly, but that's the party they want to win because they like the leader of that party and their vision. So I feel that voters are disenfranchised at this point in time when you don't get to directly elect the leader of the country and you're forced to vote for an MP whether or not you like that MP just because they like the party. We can change that. In the United States, obviously, you don't have that option. But the US is clearly not perfect. For many decades, the US promoted its system as the perfect system for everybody to follow. But we've seen what has happened over the last 20 plus years. When you include somebody like a George Bush Jr. and what he did, George Bush Jr. and what happened with the Iraq War, for example, and Afghanistan, there are definitely issues there. And then we obviously get into Trump. Regardless of your side of politics, I think we can all agree that this is not the kind of functioning democracy that we want. Congress has even lower approval ratings than either of the presidents, Obama, all these guys, Bush and Trump. And that's because we've had gridlock. That's the difference between a parliamentary democracy and what the United States has. With a parliamentary democracy, it's almost impossible to have gridlock. Somebody is in charge of the government and controls the majority of the votes so they can get legislation passed. There is a problem if it's bad legislation, but they can get it passed. In the United States, you can't just get legislation passed because you have a majority in one house. They can have the majority in the House of Representatives, but you don't have the majority in the Senate. And so you're going to have some issues and you have to do give and take. And you can't just run roughshod over things. So that is the difference. Maybe there is a hybrid model. Maybe there is a mix that we can find. I'm not sure, but I would love to get some more feedback on what are the things you would want to see change in Jamaica. Would this make Jamaica independent of the crown? Yes. If we were to get rid of the Queen as head of state and have a president instead, we would get rid of the crown as head of state. We would stop paying all that money to take care of the Governor General and maintaining King's House and all that pomp and circumstance around what is essentially a figurehead. So Jamaica is independent, but the Queen is our head of state. I am one of those people who believes that time has passed. That has not helped Jamaica to get better. We are still decades behind a lot of other countries in terms of emerging market countries. Obviously, it's not only because the Queen is our head of state. That is actually probably not the biggest cause. We've had other issues within the society, but that is something that's money it costs us. Could we better deploy that money into security, into healthcare, into infrastructure, deploy it into education? I would say yes, that money can go somewhere else. And we could use the lands for King's House for so many other things. So yes, constitutional reform along the lines of Trinidad and Tobago would remove the Queen as head of state, remove the Governor General, and replace it with a president. So I've seen Richard Dixon saying, I do think a constitutional reform would be best right now due to the high crime rate. I think making our own laws in criminal punishment would control our crime monster. That is an interesting argument. I've never heard anybody put it that way. So let's process that. Jamaica right now makes its own laws. So regardless of the Queen being there, the Governor General, we write our own laws. We did our own constitution. We can do our own constitutional reform. So we can write our own laws right now. Even if Jamaica removed the Queen as head of state and we had a president instead of a Governor General, when we pass certain laws or try to enforce certain laws, like the death penalty, for example, we are going to get hit by our multilateral partners, the US, UK, Canada, especially Canada and UK, about inhumane conditions and rights, so human rights violations. And we are signatories to a number of international conventions. So whether or not we have the Queen, we are still going to face some issues on the laws that we can create or enforce. But the Queen being the head of state doesn't stop that. I don't know if constitutional reform would actually do anything to control our crime monster, to be honest. I think our crime monster has a socio-cultural context, is rooted in an education problem that we have. Is poor decision making and fiscal management over many decades has created people who don't see good opportunities for them. We've had growth that wasn't inclusive. I think there's a lot more to our crime, especially lack of resources for our police. You take a look at some of these police stations if you've toured any in Jamaica, and you wonder, why would you expect people who are stuck in these conditions to do good jobs? You look at our clear-up rate for murders, for example, in Jamaica. And we have problems, but the police would tell you is a lack of resources. How many cars are functional for them to drive around and patrol or go to a crime scene, the forensic kits, the information they need, the labs. There's a lot more on the resources standpoint and in the training standpoint that we need more of. So will this block Jamaica from free trade markets? No. So Trinidad got rid of the Queen as head of state, has not done anything for their access to free trade markets. They're quite fine. Generally, it is not an issue for us to go under that kind of reform, right? We're not turning into a dictatorial state. We're not trying to become Venezuela or Iran. So it won't affect free trade at all. We already have independence in dealing with trade agreements. Jamaica has been a signatory to a number of agreements, including CARICOM, right? The Treaty of Chaguama. So to my understanding, we won't have a free trade problem. It shouldn't have any impact on that at all. It really is more of there's a financial impact and a psychological impact on Jamaicans to be able to vote directly for their leader versus vote for an MP knowing that you're trying to get this person to get into power. Do we separate the legislative branch from the administrative side, the executive branch? That's a bigger question, since we are used to the cabinet running the country. Most of you in the UK and Canada very much understand that people in the United States just look at that as just the craziest system in the world. Like, why would I want this person who I voted for to represent me have a second job, right? A second full-time job. You have two full-time jobs. You're a representative, a member of parliament for my constituency, but then you're also a minister or a state minister, and so you need to show up to work and run this ministry properly. I think that is detrimental to Jamaica's governance, just based on what has happened so far. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to get feedback on that one. Those of you, especially in the UK or in Canada, can give me some feedback on how it's been working for you. But the US isn't perfect either. We had major issues in the structure and the way it works. So it's not perfect either. This is still an experiment as well. So, I want to touch on some of the things that Bruce Golding brought up in this article, because it really was interesting. The Crown's reaction will be positive or negative. The Crown don't care. I'll be honest. The Queen of England don't care about Jamaica. Let's just start there. She's not really getting any money from us. The Privy Council, is our final court of appeal. Jamaica pays money every year right now to support the Caribbean Court of Justice, which is based in Trinidad. We pay for that, and we don't use it because it is not our final court of appeal. However, the Privy Council has ruled and said that we need to start using our own final court of appeal, whether it's a Jamaica final court or the Caribbean Court of Justice. The Privy Council no longer wants to hear cases from the Commonwealth countries, their former colonies. It's a waste of time. They think that you should have decisions made by judges who are of the culture, of the people, and are better suited to have context for those local cases. So the Crown don't care about us. We are not Crown lands. They own the British Virgin Islands, they own Cayman, Turks and Caicos. That's different. They are still under the Crown. So independence might cause an issue. But let's remember that England, the United Kingdom, willingly gave up Jamaica. We didn't fight for independence that we got. The Jamaica never fought for independence. They happily handed us over. We were already on a decline from the amount of sugar that we were exporting, the amount of banana that we were exporting. They had extracted massive value from Jamaica since the 1600s. So I don't think the Crown is going to care at all, one way or the other, about Jamaica removing the Queen as head of state. It is no skin off her back. She has more things to worry about now that Brexit happened anyway. So I don't think that's an issue. The biggest question then is, once we decide what kinds of constitutional reforms we need, we actually have to do a referendum. You can't just pass legislation to change the Constitution. And Bruce Golding was pointing out that we have 131 sections in the Jamaica Constitution when he wrote this article, 2018. And out of those sections, 58 of them are entrenched. So entrenched means that it's a little bit harder to get them to be changed. It's not just that you're going to vote, you draft it and you file it in the House of Representatives, and then the Senate votes on it, and then you can just suddenly, 51% vote and it changed. Now, entrenched means that you're going to need usually 2/3 majority for it to actually change. But he was also pointing out that 11 sections have deeply entrenched provisions, and what he says is that means that any change requires the approval of voters by way of a referendum. An example is that you had a referendum in the UK, the Brexit referendum. That is when you go to voters and ask them either to give their opinion on a change to the constitution, or you ask for their approval or disapproval, right? There's two kinds of referendums. You can have binding and non-binding. So we would need to figure out what kind of referendum. He says in his article that Belize in 2008 actually had a referendum. They voted, their voters opted to be able to elect their Senate, but they haven't implemented it yet. 2008, and 10 years later, they hadn't implemented that. And Jamaica only has appointed senators. I personally think that needs to change. I think it would be good for governance to have more people elected into these positions rather than, as we know, giving it to your friends or people that you want to position for future roles in government. Maybe some are elected and some are selected. The PNP and the JLP had actually agreed on some of the things they want to change, and then there were minor disagreements on kind of things that they wanted to change. So let's walk through what these things are, and then we can talk about referendums and how you would actually do one. So what former Prime Minister Golden said, what has been achieved so far was that in 1999 they actually removed the Governor General's power to make an order depriving a person of his Jamaican citizenship if he has acquired citizenship of another country. So the Governor General was no longer able to strip you of Jamaican citizenship because you got US citizenship or Canadian or British citizenship as well. I didn't even know that was a thing. So it's good to get rid of that one, right? In 2015, they included some provisions to safeguard the local government system. Right? Jamaica has a national government, the parliament, but then we have local government, which is why we have local government elections, as you see. And then we want to say that we don't have Republican status for head of state. There was an idea to expand the Senate in Jamaica. And he says that what they would do is that it would continue to be an appointed chamber rather than an elected chamber. So both the PNP and JLP were not in favor of an elected Senate. No surprise there. But what they would do is that they would increase the membership from 21 senators to 36 senators. And the way they were going to break it down was that the Prime Minister would appoint 20 senators. The Leader of the Opposition would appoint 14. So that gets us to 34. But there was disagreement as to how the final 2 seats would actually be filled. So he was saying that the PNP wanted those 2 seats reserved for third parties. We do have 2 registered third parties in Jamaica. It's always debatable if they really exist, but they are registered. He was saying that you reserve those 2 seats for third parties that nominated candidates in at least half of the constituencies and had secured at least 7.5% of the popular vote. Otherwise, those seats would revert to appointment by the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition. That's what the PNP wanted. And what the JLP was arguing was that the appointment of the 2 positions should be made by the head of state, the new president that replaces the Governor General, acting in his or her own discretion in order to introduce some non-partisan diversity in the Senate. So the JLP supported the idea of having 2 independent senators appointed by the president, nothing to do with the opposition, nothing to do with the Prime Minister. And keep in mind that Trinidad has like 8 or 9 independent senators appointed that same way. So we were taking a little bit of the Trinidad model and sprinkling that in Jamaica. So that was interesting to see the differences between the 2 parties. They had this one about appointment to critical posts. Right? Jamaica is one of those countries where who appoints the Chief Justice of the court system. Just like in the United States, the president can nominate somebody, but you have to be confirmed by the Senate. There are a lot of positions that the legislative branch has to actually confirm. But in Jamaica, the legislative branch is the same as the executive branch because it's a parliamentary system. So some of the changes that they wanted was that Appointments to certain critical positions will be made by the head of state after consultation with, but not necessarily on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition. And some of the positions that will be included will be the President of the Court of Appeal and the Chief Justice. They also said that members appointed to the Judicial Service Commission, those are the people that handle all the judges report to them, and members of the Police Service Commission, and that's who actually controls the police, the Public Defender, the Contractor General, which is no longer a position, and then independent members of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. But there was disagreement again. They said there was disagreement as to the role of Parliament in relation to these appointments. So JLP was in opposition at the time, had proposed that the appointments be subject to a 2/3 majority in each House of Parliament. So you need to get 2/3 of the MPs, right? The smaller House of Representatives, and then 2/3 of the Senate, the upper house. Well, the PNP government at the time argued that the appointments should be deemed to be confirmed unless there's a resolution to the contrary approved by a 2/3 majority in either of the two houses. So you wouldn't need 2/3 in both. You would need 2/3 in only one, and it would have to be a 2/3 majority to prevent the person from being listed. That's fascinating. Not like, so it's automatic appointment. You don't sit like in America and you get questions asked and then get appointed. It was automatic appointment unless 2/3 vote against you. So I get another question from Richard Dixon here. It says, thanks for the information, very informative. I do think a constitutional reform would be best. The JLP and the PNP thing has cost the country too much money. So I wouldn't know if constitutional reform prevents us from having a two-party system, though. The two parties control the country. Whatever reform they agree to is probably going to be designed to still keep them in power and prevent third parties from really getting any power. Nobody who has power willingly gives up power. I think we can agree. I don't care which party it is. If you have power, usually don't willingly give up power. And this two-party system does benefit both the PNP and JLP. I do think that constitutional reform that allows us to vote for a Senate would be better. So we have more independent senators. That's one, because they're appointed right now by the party. So it's your people. And that's who passes laws ultimately. And the second thing as well is being able to vote separately for your MP and the leader of the country would be a big difference for Jamaica. You probably would get rid of garrison votes at that point in time. There would be no more garrisons because I don't need to only vote for my party to ensure my preferred leader wins. I could end up seeing an independent candidate, not connected to either party, who I feel would be a better representative for my area, and I vote for them. Separately, I can vote for who I want to run the country. So theoretically, I could vote for an NDM MP in my community while voting for a JLP or PNP person to lead the country. Do we move all the way to a US system where people run in a primary to then become the nominee, or do we stick to the party elects their leader at their little event that most of the public is not invited to, right? You have to be a JLP or a PNP delegate to elect this. So less than 4,000 people select the leader of the party, and then whoever the leader of the party is traditionally becomes the prime minister, right? There's no law that says the prime minister has to be the leader of the party that got the majority of votes, but that is tradition in the Westminster system, which Jamaica has inherited from its former colonial master, the UK. So I don't think there's any reason for us to continue doing what our slave masters gave to us. Like we are old enough now to decide what we want for ourselves, right? We grew up. So those are some of the things I would put out there for us to think about. But after we talk about these disagreements and the 2/3 majority, Bruce Golding points out again that there was additional disagreement about the method of appointments for the Public Services Commission. So we're seeing some key disagreements, even though they agree that there should be constitutional reform. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, there's some disagreements that just the elected people need to sort out. Most of us don't even understand some of these things, so we have an issue. What are the issues that were fully agreed? Man, this was really good for him to break this down. Number one was that they agreed to entrench provisions for the impeachment of public officials. So removal. I would love to see that go into place in Jamaica. They did agree that there should be a requirement that only citizens of Jamaica are eligible to sit in Parliament. Some of us in the diaspora are going to disagree with that one. Right now, as long as you're a Commonwealth citizen and you've lived in Jamaica for 1 year, you can run in Jamaica. So you could be a Canadian citizen, not a Jamaican citizen, and you could still sit in Parliament. You could be a Canadian citizen and Jamaican citizen, you could run. You could be a British citizen and you can sit in Parliament. If you're a US citizen though, you cannot sit in Parliament. You cannot hold an elected position in Jamaica. You have to renounce your US citizenship because it's not a Commonwealth country. So we have some anachronisms that have been holdovers from 1962 that should change. There's also one that said that they would have a requirement for the Prime Minister to call general elections, but it would be subject to a voters list that had been updated within the previous 6 months. Right? We've had Prime Ministers in the past who have called elections on old voters list. The most famous one, I believe, was in the early 1980s with Edward Seaga, the JLP, after promising not to do that. So they would put in the Constitution that you have to have an updated voters list in order to call an election. I would love to see them add fixed election dates. We've been hearing talk about that with Prime Minister Andrew Holness. Jamaica should have fixed election dates. We shouldn't be wondering when the next election is. You shouldn't be able to call a snap election when it's perfect for you. In my opinion, at least. You guys can tell me what you think. I think that is something that should be up for debate, should be considered. But fixed election dates is, I think the majority supports that. We might have to go out and do a more scientific poll though. They also said they wanted to establish a Citizens Protection Bureau that was headed by the public defender to assist ordinary citizens in protecting their rights. So we've been having a lot of problems with that in Jamaica with citizen rights, as you know. So that'll be interesting. So I say Karen is saying, would we be trading one slave master for another? Letting go of the English system and taking on the American system that is currently not working with a president who is in fact telling lawmakers to make me if you're there. So what I'm saying, Karen, is do not use the US system. We would not be switching from the British Westminster system to the US system. I think the US system has proven it is an experiment that needs more work. I like the idea of separating a legislative branch from the executive branch and voting directly for your president. However, you need to have checks and balances on the power of that executive branch, and clearly this legislative branch is not up to it. We've seen gridlock in Congress in the United States for decades now. So that is not, in my opinion, you don't bring that over. We've seen the problems with that. We need to be looking more at the Trinidad model. So Trinidad got rid of the Queen as head of state, no more Governor General, has a president now, has a number of independent senators in their Senate. Their Senate is still appointed. I would prefer to see an elected Senate so Jamaicans can elect more people. And I do think that more Jamaicans than less support the idea of directly electing the leader of the country, separate from voting for their local representative. So there are aspects of the model that we can take from the US, but we would not be switching wholesale to the American Republic model, their version, because Trinidad is a republic model. It's not like the US model though. So definitely don't want to switch for that slave master. 100% agree with you, Karen. I live in the US. I have lived there for a very long time. This is not the system that I would ever want to force on somebody or even recommend to them. We have major issues, and that is now hurting the entire world, not just us. So that's not the system I would recommend. Some of the other things that they agreed on was, that provisions empower individuals and organizations to challenge the actions of the government without having to obtain the consent of the Attorney General on public interest grounds. So right now, for you to actually challenge the government, the Attorney General has to give you permission. That sounds awkward. So I agree with that. What we need to change that. As a citizen, the government represents me. You can't tell me I can't sue you. I should be allowed to bring actions against you. But what were the next steps if we agreed on all the things that we wanted to change? So voting for the person in charge of the country, we want an elected Senate, we want more independent senators, all these things. Let's say we only wanted 3. You'd have to draft a paper. It then goes through a process that was a bit, I don't know, disappointing, disheartening. But here's the process as explained in this article by former Prime Minister Bruce Golding. It says that after we've identified with what we want to implement, and we agree on the things. The next step would be to deal with those measures that have to be approved by the people in a referendum. So remember, some are entrenched, some are deeply entrenched. If we need to have a referendum, we need to start putting things in place to have that referendum. A referendum is no different from an election. It's going to cost us at least now $2 billion Jamaican dollars to execute that referendum. And that referendum needs to actually list the things that the people are voting on. And we need to decide, is it a referendum just to ask their opinion? Are they in favor of it? Or is it a binding referendum to get their approval to change it? So two key decisions would have to be made. But more importantly, as the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister pointed out, is voter apathy. We know that this is a problem in a lot of countries. Jamaica does not have high turnout for elections. Even the United States does not have high turnout. Voter turnout is extremely low because most people have checked out. They feel that both parties have not delivered on the promises consistently throughout different administrations. And so they don't bother, right? We just talk on our veranda and leave it alone. So I think that you would have to convert a whole lot of people to show up, because imagine having, say, 100,000 people are voting age in our country and registered to vote, eligible and registered. So you have 100,000 potential people to vote, but only 40% show up to vote. So only 40,000 people show up to actually vote in a referendum. But out of that 40,000, you only need basically 20,001. If you only need 50.1%, if you need 2/3 majority, then obviously we can see where the numbers go. But you don't need that many people. 30,000 people could decide the fate of 100,000 people because 60,000 didn't show up to participate at all. So we would probably need to have some rules in place for the referendum, which actually don't exist in the Constitution either. What percentage of the voting registered voters need to show up? So is it that more than 60% of the registered voters need to show up, more than 40%, 2/3 of the registered voters need to participate? What's the number? And then after we even get that, right, they said that turnout in 2016 was less than 37% in the Bahamas for a referendum on constitutional changes, even though 90% of voters turn out in Bahamas in general. Jamaica don't have 90% turnout. So we need to increase turnout, and we would need to, which means getting voter apathy fixed. That's a problem. And we don't want too few people to decide what happens. Brexit is a great example of, if you don't have high enough turnout, you can have a vocal minority impose their views on the entire country. And whichever one, whether it was Remain or Leave, they were still going to be minorities because you didn't have 65, 75%, 90% turnout. If you have low turnout, it can be really crazy what happens. We have adverse consequences possibly, or it might not seem fair. It needs to appear fair. I think we can agree with that one. Feel free to send more comments. Don't have me just sitting here talking and not here to just do a speech, guys. The other one that Bruce Golding pointed out though was the design of the ballot. Just get it into the logistics now. He says how the ballot is designed is an issue, and we need to look at it. Do you package all of the proposed changes to the Constitution in one thing and then you just vote yes or no? So just a simple up or down vote. Or do you put each change that you want to make and you vote up or down on each one? When I vote here in the United States, I don't get blanket stuff to vote on. I get each amendment to vote on, and I get to vote. And this is usually state level elections. So I live in Florida. We want to make changes to Florida law or the Constitution. I have to vote on individual ones, and I can do up or down on each one. So Richard is asking an interesting question. I heard you reference former PM Mr. Bruce Golding. It's clear what that was his vision. So what about our current PM Mr. Holness? Isn't the reform a vision of his? So this is actually not Bruce Golding's vision. Bruce Golding sat on the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, but this was something that was agreed by the PNP and the JLP. So both political parties that have always controlled Jamaica at one time or another agree about constitutional reform. And he wrote an article to explain to us what was drafted in Parliament after getting public comment and then they actually published a paper. You would publish usually have green papers and white papers that come out and get comments. So this is not his vision. This is actually the vision of the two parties and joint after lots of discussion. I would say that Andrew Holness, as a high-level member of the JLP throughout this, supports a lot of this. He has specifically talked about constitutional reform, and he has also talked about fixed election dates. I do not believe, I won't speak for Andrew, but I do not believe there is any politician in Jamaica at this point who supports election of senators. They are quite comfortable with appointment of senators. So that's something that we're going to have an issue. I have not heard any politician in Jamaica support the idea of direct elections for the leader of the country, separate from MPs as well. So correct me if I'm wrong if you can find it. I have not heard that, and I don't know. I don't know if they would support it either. But ultimately, government is for the people, by the people, of the people. Right? They work for us. We pay taxes, and they work on behalf of citizens. So if citizens feel that we should have more of a say, we should have more independent governance, what has happened so far is not working for the country, then we can get up and say that. Right? Citizens can write a petition. We can force them to discuss that. And we could have a constitutional reform movement. We don't have to depend on leaders of countries. They are not that much smarter than us, and even then they still work for the citizens. We don't live in an autocracy or it's a democracy, not an autocracy, not a dictatorship. And Karen is saying, perhaps someone like you explaining to the masses in layman's terms the importance and the ramifications. Jamaica needs a paradigm shift, one that will move the country forward without ripping out its soul. Election of senators is a must. So Karen, I appreciate that. That's a really good vote of confidence. I am more than willing to be one of the voices pushing this and explaining it. That's why I like doing these videos. I love that they're talking about we need to, move the country forward. That's why this is called Island Forward. I want to push that idea of how can we, as a diaspora, contribute to moving the island of Jamaica forward. And this is one of the ways. I think constitutional reform is going to be critical. It's going to help us reduce corruption in government. It's going to help us reduce waste in government. It's going to improve oversight, which we all know those are three major things that have been holding back Jamaica from before independence, and especially since independence. So I appreciate the vote of confidence. We will continue to build that and see where it goes. So back to the design of the ballot. Do you have the whole change and people just vote yes or no on all the changes, or do you have individual changes and people vote for each of the changes yes or no? When you're designing it though, you would have to make sure that voting for one, say yes for this one, but no for the second one, and then yes for the third one, doesn't somehow break it, right? Some of them are going to be interdependent. You would need to figure out a way that if people voted for half of them and didn't vote for the other half, they still work. That's just the way some things are. So they would have to be very cautious in how they design it. And then, of course, we have the biggest issue, which former Prime Minister Golden pointed out, is you need to have a public education program. I mean, we talk about civics not being taught in schools anymore, whether it's in the US or in Jamaica. Most people don't know how government works. They don't know about the branches of government. They don't know how laws are made. They don't understand who they're voting for. In the US, every presidential election, people are up in arms about the electoral college. Didn't you learn about that in middle school? And the answer is actually no. In most cases, they haven't learned about it. Jamaica is no different. We tend not to learn about our system and how system of governance works. Big up Steve in Birmingham. Yeah, man. Thanks for being here in the evening to watch. I purposely set it at 1 o'clock so I could get more UK participation watching live rather than forcing you guys to wait for the posted video tomorrow or later in the week. So thanks for tuning in, Steve. We're getting some good interaction from some people in here, but I realize that a lot of things that we here in the US and Canada tend to do, we pick times that are just not conducive to you Jamaicans in the UK to participate. We need to realize that you guys were part of first in terms of the diaspora. That's where Jamaicans moved to first, and then Canada and the US. So we should focus on doing things a bit earlier to allow easier participation amongst our UK Jamaican brethren. That's my personal belief, because we need to be more united, and so this is why I'm picking these kinds of times. So let me know if the time was appropriate. Thanks for tuning in from Birmingham. But yeah, this is what we have to worry about when it comes to voters. You need to educate voters. Uninformed voters are probably the worst voters in the world. I would rather you stay home than come and vote for something and don't understand the consequences of your vote. I would hope that more people would agree with me on that one. But educated voters are better voters. And we don't mean educated in the sense of a college degree. That's not what we mean when we mean educated voters. I think what we mean is educated in the sense of understanding the repercussions of your vote. Whatever you're voting for or against, you understand what happens based on casting a vote. That is how you become an educated voter. It does follow that if you went to school, you should keyword should, you should be able to better understand the repercussions of participating in that election and voting for or against something or someone. It's not automatic. We all know people who are educated fools, to use a common term. So you don't assume that education means that they are an educated voter. But we would need to do voter education to explain this is what constitutional reform means. Here are the changes we would make. Right now, this is how it works. If we change it to this is how it would work at that point. And this is what is required from you to vote. So, Karen, you're watching from Vienna, Austria. The time is perfect. Just finished work. Wow, Karen, thank you all the way from Austria. Really appreciate that. I hope you have great weather. I know it's in the evening now, but hoping it's all great over there. Thank you for that, and I appreciate the comment about the time. I really want to make sure we are inclusive with the members of the diaspora that we have involved here. I don't want to be a US-centric thing. We've unfortunately been too US-centric in our diaspora discussions as well and engagement, and we need to be engaging far more of our Jamaicans in the UK, in Scotland, all these areas, right, and in the EU, and then over into the Middle East as well. Jamaicans are everywhere, right? We know that. I probably have some Jamaicans in Antarctica right now working at some science station. We are everywhere, and we need to become more united. So I hope to help foster that through this Jamaicans.com series of live videos that we do. I think it's a great platform to connect Jamaicans all over. So yeah, we're talking about educated voters. To get somebody to come and vote for something as important as this, as you can just see from some of the questions here, that is going to be key. What does it mean? So you would need a super simple pamphlet to explain. You'd need to do a road show around the country to explain it. You need to be on social media with videos. I mean, there are enough things that we could do, but that's going to cost money as well, because you're probably going to need 2/3 majority to change that. So I need to do some research and see in history of Jamaica, what did we do to promote the West Indies Federation referendum that we had, right? There was a vote on whether we should stay in the West Indies Federation or leave, and this was 1961. And we left, right? We left the Federation, which then collapsed because of that. So that was our Brexit. That was Jamexit. Call it whatever you want. And some of the Eastern Caribbean still hold us up to this day for that. So be it. But Jamaica had a referendum. It's the same way that we then did independence. How did we get people to now say, hey, we're going to become an independent country? What did mobilization look like? But those are some of the issues that we're going to face when you decide that we want to have, constitutional reform. I don't think it's a question of if we want constitutional reform. I think the question is, what exactly does constitutional reform look like? And then we need to have that discussion. We need to then figure out, this is what we want. Okay, how do we execute it? Is it that we need a referendum or not? And what kind of referendum? And then we get additional issues. But as you can see, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't have agreement on, and there's a bunch of stuff that we do have agreement on. Maybe what we do is you start with the ones that you have agreement on and get those out of the way. Otherwise, we're going to be waiting another 50 years or more before something like this happens. And I do think that this needs to happen within my generation, within my lifetime. That's up to you. Some of you are older than me and you want to see it in your lifetime. And I don't blame you, because we've seen at Jamaica that went up for a bit, but that we've seen a steady decline. We're now seeing some movement up again, but in general, Jamaica has underperformed its potential. I don't think any of us watching this would disagree. Jamaica has underperformed its potential, and it hurts. It's disappointed to see it. There are a number of reasons, and they're mainly internal, not external. And so that means we need some change. We need reform. And I think that's important. I have my preferences. I'm open to other options. I want more questions, more interaction. We are looking at all of these things. It was so interesting to read this article from former Prime Minister Bruce Gordon. Regardless of what you think about him, and there are issues obviously in his legacy, and he has to live with that. We didn't do it. But he certainly understands the constitutional stuff better than most people, and has been a proponent for that. And let us see what happens with once this new election is called in Jamaica. I'm sure we're going to have discussion about constitutional reform, especially the fixed election dates that was promised before. There's going to be more people saying, well, PM Holness, he had promised that. Is that something he's running on? Is it going to change? Maybe somebody's going to bring up the question about the Governor General, getting rid of him as head of state and moving to a presidential system, and not the US style presidential system, but more like what we have as Trinidad in terms of a republic. Maybe we can push to get that question on his mind, right? If enough people post about it, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, talk to their friends about it, create a video, spread it. You can actually force, a topic to become something that they have to cover. Maybe one day I get to sit down and do an interview with the Prime Minister and ask him specifically about constitutional reform and get some of those answers, and then go to the leader of opposition and ask him as well. Let's start asking the questions though. Not enough people are asking the questions. Not enough of us are using our power as citizens. I don't care if you don't live in Jamaica, you're still a Jamaican citizen. So as a Jamaican citizen, not enough of us are asking this question about constitutional reform or what we think should be changed. We're not having enough of those discussions. We tend to limit it to voting. Some of us want voting from overseas, some of us don't. But we tend to be talking about overseas voting, the diaspora vote. We tend to be talking about corruption and transparency and doing that. We talk about having an elected Senate, not an appointed Senate. That's a smaller conversation, but I have come across that. And then a big topic though is that people don't want to have to vote for an MP just to elect the Prime Minister. They would like to be able to vote directly for the leader of the country, separate from their representative in Parliament. I think those topics have to be discussed. Going into an election year is when you're going to have the most people paying attention to elections, paying attention to constitution, and more engaged in the process. If we miss this window this year, which I expect an election to be called this year, everybody's speculating they're due by June of next year. So we have 12 months pretty much, or just over 12 months. We have essentially a 15-month window where we'll have the most attention of voters. And then after we're probably going to be stuck with 5 years again, and it just quiet down. We need to leverage that. We as a diaspora need to be more united in asking those questions and discussing them. Talk to our High Commissioner, our Consul Generals, talk to our ambassadors, bring it up in our conversations with our friends and family around the dinner table when you're having your gungo pea soup and all them things, right? For those of you who prefer red pea soup, no offense. If you're having your red pea soup as well, that's good. But talk about it. When you go to conferences where there's diaspora people speaking, or a Jamaican conference, bring that up. We have a diaspora conference that is also going to happen again, not this year, but next year. Bring it up there. We should have an entire panel discussion about constitutional reform. We should have a presentation about what has happened so far and ideas for reform, so people can now be more informed and start to think about this more. So that's my personal belief. I don't know how many of you believe that. I do feel that I'm in the majority. I could be wrong. But that's something that I personally want to help push the conversation and have more discussions about that. And I will try and get more information from the people I know, my contacts, and then feed that back to you guys. It would be really interesting to do a sit down with the Prime Minister, ask that, and post a video on here, and so we can actually directly answer some of these questions. And clearly, I probably need to try and get to sit down with former Prime Minister Bruce Golding. He could give us some amazing context as somebody who is not running, is not involved in either party, and not active in daily politics anymore. So he has nothing to lose at this point. I think he would give us some really honest answers and honest assessments. So let me work on that. That's my commitment to you. I will work on trying to pull those together and sharing that information. I will post a link to this article under the video here so people can have more context, save it, read it. This is not stuff I grew up knowing. I read these things and I talk to other people, right? You can be just as smart as me by diving into this stuff and reading it and become more educated. And that's all I want to do. I just want to share what I come across, share knowledge, pay it forward, get you to think about something. I'm not telling you what to think, but I do want to provide information to allow you to make up your own mind. But it's something that we might not have been thinking of. Some of the ideas in here I wasn't thinking of. But that's also because I didn't know it was a problem. So thank you very much for your time. We have 4 more minutes left. Anything anybody wants to bring up, comments, questions, please share them here. I want to keep it tight 1 hour. I want to maximize your time and bring value to you. I don't want your dinner to get cold for those of you in Europe and the UK. This is lunchtime pretty much for those of us in the US and Canada. I think an hour is a good amount of time to sit and watch a video or listen to something. I'm not here to spend 2-3 hours with you guys. Even if I know some of you might want to do that, but I don't mind keeping it tight. I think we covered some really good topics. I hope that explain some of this stuff in layman's terms. In closing, I want to be specific that I am not a supporter of getting rid of the Westminster system, what the UK has, and switching to the American system. I don't think the American system is ideal. It's flawed, and we've now seen over 20 years how flawed it is. So that's an experiment that needs to adjust. I do think the Trinidad and Tobago system is more fitting. So we have a president instead of the Queen as head of state with a governor general. We have more independent senators. I like that idea as well. I would prefer that we elect the senators rather than appoint independent senators. So we might have a point of contention there and some disagreement. I do think that we should be able to vote directly for the leader of the country separately from the member of parliament that represents you. And I would love to see more separation of the legislative branch and the executive branch. I don't think cabinet members should also automatically be members of parliament and carry 2 jobs. I think in Jamaica's case, it would be better for the country and better for resources to not have them both share that job, because we have a corruption problem. We need to just acknowledge that and not stick our heads in the sand. We need more transparency. We need more accountability, and that would be good if we separated those jobs. Winning an election does not mean that you would make a good minister of finance or education or whatever it is that you want to be. I think you should become a minister based on your abilities and your ideas, right? Abilities and ideas is 2 things, not just the abilities or not just the ideas. Because we need people with ideas and we need people who can execute. Members of parliament should focus on representing their people, because that's what they're elected to do, represent their constituency. And that's my personal opinion. Feel free to share what you want to share, but I do think it would definitely reduce corruption, reduce waste, and give us better governance and have better outcomes for Jamaica. At this point in time, we've tried it one way since 1962. That way has under-delivered very badly, and we have a crime problem because of that. We have a cultural problem within the society. We have massive migration. 70% of tertiary educated students migrate from Jamaica every year. We see the articles talking about our nurses leaving, our teachers, our doctors being recruited. So clearly something is not working, something is broken, and we need to fix it. We need to do something different. But it's not the American model, and the UK model is obviously not working for us. Let's look at Trinidad and maybe make some tweaks to that and do it even better. I know we're going to say we should do it better than Trinidad, so we could make some tweaks and do it better. But those are my thoughts. Hopefully you can sleep on that, discuss this, have somebody else watch a video, leave your comments on the video. I will happily be replying. I always check the comments under here and engage with people, and that's all I want to do. Let's have a discussion. I don't know if I'm right. I have some ideas I want to share. I want to get your feedback, and I'm looking forward to that. So it's now 2:00. We had a great 1 hour. I really want to say thank you for the comments, especially we had Karen with some questions and comments. I see Richard Dixon and Dave Hopwood, some really good questions. I appreciate the interaction. This makes it feel even more worthwhile of my time to take an hour out of my day to do this video with you, and to spend hours doing the research beforehand to bring that information to you. So thank you for that. I understand that you don't owe me your time, and time is the most precious commodity that we have. So thank you for engaging with me. Thank you for sharing this. Put the video out there. Looking forward to the comments to come, the feedback, and let's talk more about constitutional reform. Somebody brought up the death penalty. We just talked about that. Hi, Maxine. So that came up earlier when we talked about the one, what would the crown be upset or not, and slave master or not. And I pointed out that we do make our own laws at this point, and whether or not we had the Queen as head of state wouldn't matter. If Jamaica decides to enforce the death penalty, which is on the books, we will face international issues. We are signatories to certain treaties around the world, and our largest trading partners are going to have an issue with us enforcing the death penalty. So we have to weigh those options, and that is going to be an international decision. It's not just that Jamaica do it. If we don't need the international community, then fine, go ahead and do it. If you believe that Jamaica is now extremely connected in a global world and needs that, we'd have to find a way to implement it. But I think the majority of the world has now decided that death penalty is inhumane, and we would be probably on the wrong side of history. And then we'd have to look at what's the purpose of the death penalty. Is it that we think the death penalty is going to reduce crime in Jamaica? Or if we look at statistics, has it shown that the death penalty in other countries has done nothing to reduce crime? My argument to anybody bringing that up would be, let's look at guns, for example. Right? Guns in Jamaica are illegal. You have to go through firearm licensing, and you don't have the right to bear arms. That has not prevented gun deaths. So what is on the statutes don't necessarily automatically make it safer, but then there are other countries that outlaw guns and make it a lot harder to have them, right? Canada and so on. Australia did that, and they have far fewer gun crime and gun deaths. We look at the United States with a right to bear arms. America locks up a lot of people, but we still have problems with crime. Not problems like Jamaica, obviously, but Jamaica, the US has like 40% of the world's criminal population, and sitting here, and it is right. So you have US in some states. The problem with you have death penalty in like a Texas. It has, the statistics have shown, the studies have shown it has no impact on crime, right? It's not a deterrent. The death penalty is not actually a deterrent. Maybe it could be a deterrent in Jamaica. We don't know. So the key is, though, if we decide to enforce the death penalty, bring back hanging, what happens to our international support, right? This is money, loans, correspondent banking. The countries that disagree, that could cripple Jamaica, and we have to decide if it's worth it. Personally, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think the death penalty is a deterrent. We had crime squads that were killing criminals, and you never stop them from committing crime, right? Crime happens because people feel that they are desperate and have no other option. That's a core part of crime. Eventually, you're just criminal. You feel like this is the only way. I want to eat a food. I don't care. I'm antisocial. I'm going to just do my thing. But we need to ensure that the conditions for crime are minimized, and we also need to ensure that the judicial system, right, and the police force have better resources to catch criminals, prosecute criminals, and then reform criminals. Locking up people is not enough. You're going to lock them up, it costs us money to maintain them in lockup, then you release them, and they come out with what? Right? At least in the US prison system, you go to jail, and then you can get an education, you can come with a degree, you come with a skill. You look at the Nordic countries like Norway, it is about reform. Locking people up and then releasing them back under the street is not a solution for crime. So I don't know if I don't think killing them is a solution either. It's not a deterrent. These guys are already expect to not live past 22 years old. So they're out there doing craziness anyway. But that's it. We've gone over by a few minutes, but I appreciate the question, Maxine. I think that constitutional reform, I wouldn't do anything with the death penalty. I would just leave that there. We're not touching that. Let's focus on the voting side of things, the representation, the head of state, and make sure we have transparency, accountability, and we can reduce corruption and waste in government. So thank you. Big up Austria and Birmingham as well. I want to single out those two for telling me where you were watching from. I'm glad that this time worked for you. We'll do more, and I will definitely use this kind of time. Thank you very much. Signing off, David Mullings, just saying one love, really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.